They all laughed at him for inheriting the old cabin, but later they regretted it. Cade Miller was a man who had always struggled to get ahead in life. A simple rancher in the dusty, quiet town of Red Ridge, he spent most of his days tending to his cattle and fixing up his old ranch house. Money was tight, and dreams of a better life seemed like a distant fantasy. But everything changed when he received the letter. The letter that came one chilly fall morning and turned his world upside down. It was from a lawyer, a name Cade had never heard before. The letter told him that his distant uncle, who Cade had never met, had passed away and left him something. A piece of land, a cabin on the outskirts of town. It was a strange thing to inherit, especially since Cade had no memories of his uncle. His uncle had lived a reclusive life far away from Red Ridge. The townsfolk rarely mentioned him, and when they did, it was always with a mix of suspicion and gossip. They called him the strange inventor, but no one knew exactly what he had done or where he had gone. When Cade first heard about the inheritance, he wasn't sure what to think. The cabin was old, falling apart, and nobody in town thought much of it. Most people believed it was nothing more than an eyesore, a leftover relic of the past. Cade, though, was different. He didn't see the cabin as a burden. He saw it as an opportunity. At first, the people of Red Ridge laughed when they heard about the inheritance. "What's he going to do with that old shack?" they would say. "Ain't nothing worth salvaging out there?" They all thought Cade had made a foolish decision. Who would want to live in a place like that? But Cade wasn't bothered by their words. He packed up his few belongings and made the long journey out to the cabin. The road was rough, the dirt path winding its way through thick patches of trees and over hills. As he neared the cabin, Cade could see the weathered wood, the roof sagging with age, and the windows shattered by time. It wasn't much to look at, but something about it called to him. This place, his uncle's home, felt like it had a story to tell. The first few days were spent clearing the overgrown weeds, fixing the broken windows, and trying to make the place livable. It was hard work, but Cade didn't mind. It felt like a fresh start. As he worked, he couldn't help but wonder about his uncle. What kind of man was he? Why had he chosen to live here, so far away from the rest of the world? One evening after a long day of repairs, Cade was sitting on the porch of the cabin, sipping water from his canteen and looking out at the sunset. The sky was a mix of orange and purple, and the air had a cool bite to it. The wind whispered through the trees, and for a moment Cade felt like he was the only person in the world. It was peaceful, but it was also lonely. Suddenly something caught his eye. There was a light in the distance, far beyond the cabin, hovering in the sky. At first he thought it was a plane, but it wasn't moving like one. It floated there still for a moment, then vanished. Cade rubbed his eyes and looked again, but the light was gone. He shook his head, thinking maybe he was just tired from the long day. But then, over the next few days, it happened again. Cade would be working around the cabin, and out of the corner of his eye he would see strange lights in the sky. They didn't belong to any plane or star. They were too close, too bright, and too erratic. Sometimes they moved in odd patterns, like they were searching for something. And sometimes, when the lights were at their brightest, Cade thought he heard a whispering sound, low and distant, like a voice calling from the trees. Cade didn't know what to make of it, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Maybe it was just his imagination, but he had to be sure. He decided to explore the area around the cabin. If there were something out there, something strange, he wanted to find out what it was. He walked for hours, following the trail behind the cabin into the woods. The forest was thick with tall trees and the scent of pine. The air grew cooler as the sun dipped lower in the sky, and Cade began to wonder if he had made a mistake. The woods felt endless, and the light from the cabin seemed to fade the further he went. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Cade stumbled upon something. A large rock formation, covered in moss. At first it seemed like just another natural oddity, but something about it felt different. As he got closer, he noticed strange symbols carved into the surface of the rock. They were unlike anything he had ever seen before. Sharp angles, curved lines, and odd shapes that seemed to pulse with an energy he couldn't explain. Cade's heart raced as he examined the carvings. He didn't know much about ancient symbols, but he had seen enough in his life to know that these weren't just random markings. They were purposeful, designed to mean something. But what? And why had they been placed here, hidden away in the woods? He spent the next few days studying the symbols in the area around the cabin. He even tried to take a few of the rocks back to the cabin, but the weight of the stones was too much to carry. It was clear that someone or something had left these markings behind, and it wasn't just his imagination playing tricks on him. As the days passed, Cade became more and more intrigued. The lights in the sky continued, but they were never consistent. Sometimes they appeared at dusk, sometimes at midnight, and sometimes at sunrise. But there was one thing that never changed: the symbols in the woods. They seemed to grow stronger the more Cade looked at them. Like they were calling him, the people of Red Ridge continued to laugh at him, telling him he was wasting his time. "That old cabin's cursed," they would say. "Best thing you can do is pack up and leave." But Cade wasn't ready to give up yet. He had inherited this cabin for a reason, and he was determined to find out what that reason was. One evening, as he stood by the cabin, watching the stars above, Cade made a decision. He would stay and discover the truth about his uncle's past, about the strange lights in the sky, and about the mysterious symbols. There was something waiting for him here, something that nobody in Red Ridge understood. And so, with the wind rustling in the trees and the stars shining brightly above, Cade Miller set out on a journey that would change his life forever. The world he thought he knew was about to become much bigger than he ever imagined. Cade had spent the past few weeks settling into the old cabin. It wasn't much, but it felt like a fresh start. He had cleared out the overgrown weeds, fixed up the windows, and patched up the roof. The place still had its flaws, but there was something comforting about it, something that made him feel like it was home. But as the days passed, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the cabin than met the eye. The strange lights in the sky hadn't stopped. Every night, like clockwork, they would appear, hovering over the hills just beyond the cabin. Cade had seen them flicker like distant stars at first, but now he was sure they were something else, something unnatural. The lights would dart back and forth, too quick for a plane, too high for a drone. And sometimes, when the lights hovered for too long, Cade would hear the whispers again. It was always just out of reach, as if the wind carried them from some distant place. He couldn't understand the words, but he felt they were meant for him. It was as if the lights were guiding him. One evening, Cade decided to take action. He had enough of the strange happenings. It was time to explore the forest behind the cabin again, this time in the daylight. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but something inside him told him that the answers were hidden out there. With a heavy heart, Cade grabbed his pack, slung it over his shoulder, and set off down the trail that led into the woods. The air was cool, and the trees were thick with leaves. The forest seemed to go on forever, and Cade wondered how long it would take to get lost if he kept walking. But he didn't care. He needed answers. He walked for a few hours, deeper and deeper into the woods, until the sounds of the world around him faded. The rustling of the trees, the chirping of birds, and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot were the only sounds he heard. He walked for so long that the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows between the trees. But Cade was determined. He had to know what was out here. Finally, just as he thought he might have to turn back, Cade spotted something in the distance. It was a clearing, the kind of place where the sun could still reach the ground even as it set. He made his way toward it, his boots crunching the dry leaves beneath him. As he approached, something caught his eye. It was a small rock, covered in moss. But what was strange about it were the markings, strange symbols etched into the surface. Cade bent down to examine the rock. The symbols weren't like anything he had ever seen before. They were sharp and angular, with lines that seemed to flow and twist in unnatural ways. He ran his fingers over the markings, feeling a strange tingle run up his spine. He wasn't sure what they meant, but he knew one thing for certain. They weren't random. Someone had carved these symbols for a reason. The deeper Cade looked, the more he felt like he was being pulled into something. The symbols weren't just on this rock. They were on others, scattered around the clearing like a trail. He followed them, moving from one rock to another until he reached the center of the clearing. And there, in the middle, was something else. Something Cade had not expected to find. It was a stone tablet standing upright in the ground. The tablet was tall, covered in more of the strange symbols, and it looked ancient. It had a weathered look, as if it had been standing there for centuries, untouched by time. But there was something else about it. Something that made Cade's heart race. The symbols on the tablet were different. They were larger, bolder, and seemed to glow faintly in the fading light of the evening. Cade stepped closer, his hand reaching out to touch the tablet. As soon as his fingers brushed against the surface, a low hum filled the air. It was a sound Cade could feel in his chest, deep and resonating. The tablet seemed to come alive under his touch. The symbols on it began to shift, moving in patterns that Cade couldn't follow. It was like they were alive, swirling around him, beckoning him to understand. His mind raced with questions. What was this? Who had left it here, and why? As the tablet's hum grew louder, Cade's mind was flooded with images. Strange landscapes, alien skies, and ships that seemed to glide through the air. He saw flashes of places that didn't look like Earth, places that looked otherworldly, as if they were from another time, or perhaps another planet. The hum suddenly stopped. Cade stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest. The tablet was still, its glow fading as quickly as it had appeared. He stood there for a moment, unsure of what had just happened. His hand still tingled where he had touched the tablet, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just uncovered something important, something far bigger than he could understand. Cade knew that he needed answers. There was no way he could ignore this discovery. Whatever his uncle had been involved in, it was connected to this place, this cabin, and the strange lights, and now Cade was part of it too. But the more he thought about it, the more questions arose. Why had his uncle chosen this spot for his cabin? What was the purpose of these symbols, and what had they been trying to tell him? Cade didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear. This was just the beginning. Whatever was hidden out there in the woods, Cade was going to find it, and he wasn't going to let anyone stand in his way. He left the clearing that evening with the knowledge that his life had changed forever. As he walked back to the cabin, his mind raced. The symbols, the tablet, the lights in the sky, everything was connected, and Cade Miller was going to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. When he returned to the cabin, the wind had picked up. The sound of it whistling through the trees seemed louder than before, almost as if it were trying to speak to him. Cade looked up at the sky, hoping to catch a glimpse of the lights again. But tonight, there was nothing. Just the quiet night, the stars, and the cabin. For the first time since he had arrived, Cade felt both excited and afraid. He had opened a door that couldn't be closed, and whatever lay beyond it was far more than he had bargained for. Tomorrow, he would return to the clearing. But this time, he would bring something with him, a plan. He wasn't sure what he would find, but one thing was for certain. His uncle had left him a legacy, and Cade Miller was ready to discover it. The days that followed Cade's discovery in the woods were filled with questions. This strange tablet, the glowing symbols, and the mysterious lights in the sky, all of it seemed to be part of a larger puzzle. But Cade didn't know how to fit the pieces together. Each night he would return to the clearing, hoping the tablet would reveal more, but it remained silent. The whispers from the wind had stopped, and the lights in the sky had become fewer. Cade wasn't sure if that was a good sign or a bad one. It wasn't until a week later that Cade would learn how deep this mystery ran, and how dangerous it was. One afternoon, just as Cade was finishing up his work on the cabin, a group of strangers appeared in Red Ridge. They were dressed in dark clothing, their faces hidden behind sunglasses, and they walked with a purpose that made the townsfolk uneasy. The group didn't stop at the saloon or the general store. Instead, they went straight to the sheriff's office. Cade watched them from his porch, his gut tightening with suspicion. The leader of the group was a tall man with sharp features, his eyes cold and calculating. His name was Vortex, and he was unlike anyone Cade had ever seen before. Vortex had a commanding presence, and the other members of his group followed him with unquestioning loyalty. It wasn't long before Cade heard rumors from the townspeople. They were mercenaries, hired guns from out of state, and they were looking for something. By the time night fell, Cade had heard enough. The town was on edge. People were talking about strange disappearances, secretive men in dark clothes, and whispers of something big happening in the hills. Cade couldn't shake the feeling that it all had something to do with the cabin. He had spent too many nights studying the symbols, and now with these strangers in town, he knew it was only a matter of time before they found out what he had discovered. The next morning, Cade decided to take action. He couldn't wait for them to come to him. He had to learn more about what was going on, and he needed to protect the cabin from whoever these people were. He packed his bag with supplies, water, a few tools, and a rope, and set off toward the clearing again. The sun was high in the sky, and the forest was quiet, almost too quiet. As he walked deeper into the woods, he kept his eyes open for any signs of the strangers. He had to be careful. He wasn't sure how many of them there were, but he knew they were dangerous. When Cade reached the clearing, he was relieved to find it empty. The tablet was still there, standing tall and silent. He walked over to it, his mind racing with thoughts of the mercenaries. Vortex and his group must have been looking for the same thing Cade had found. But why? What did they want with the tablet and the symbols? And why had his uncle hidden it here in the first place? As he stood there, thinking, Cade heard something. A sound that made his heart race. Footsteps, soft but quick, crunching the leaves in the distance. Cade turned to see a figure moving toward the clearing. It was one of the mercenaries, wearing dark clothes and carrying a rifle. Cade's blood ran cold. He had to act fast. Without thinking, Cade darted behind a large rock, his breath catching in his throat. He crouched low, hoping the mercenary hadn't seen him. The man moved closer, his steps slow and deliberate. Cade held his breath, watching as the mercenary paused at the edge of the clearing. The man's eyes scanned the area, his gaze moving over the tablet, then to the surrounding trees. Cade's heart thudded in his chest. For a long moment the mercenary stood there, as if sensing something wasn't right. Then, without warning, he turned and walked back into the woods, disappearing from sight. Cade exhaled, his muscles relaxed for the first time since he'd spotted the man. He waited a few more minutes, just to be sure, before standing up and making his way toward the tablet again. His mind was racing. He had to find out what was so important about this place. That night, as Cade sat by the fire outside the cabin, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The fire crackled in the silence, and the shadows of the trees stretched long across the ground. Cade's hand hovered over his rifle, ready to grab it at a moment's notice. He had learned to trust his instincts, and right now, every part of him was telling him that something was coming. Just as he was about to stand up and check the perimeter, the sound of footsteps reached his ears. He froze, his heart pounding. Slowly he turned, his eyes scanning the darkness. And there, in the shadows, stood Vortex. Cade's hand instinctively gripped the rifle, but he didn't raise it. There was no point in shooting yet. Vortex was too close, and Cade wasn't sure how many men he had with him. This was a standoff. Vortex's cold eyes locked onto Cade's, and a smirk played at the corner of his lips. "I see you've been busy, Miller," Vortex said, his voice low and calm. "You've found what we were looking for." Cade stood up, his posture tense. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied, keeping his voice steady. Vortex laughed, the sound hollow and eerie. "Don't play games. You've been poking around the woods, uncovering things you shouldn't have." He stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "You found the tablet, didn't you? And the symbols?" "It's all connected, Miller. And now you're standing in the way." Cade's mind raced. He had no idea how Vortex knew about the tablet, but it was clear that the mercenaries were after something far more dangerous than he could have imagined, and Cade knew he couldn't let them have it. "You want it, don't you?" Cade asked, his voice firm. "The technology my uncle found? What are you planning to do with it?" Vortex's smile widened. "That's none of your concern. What matters now is that you're standing in my way, and I don't take kindly to obstacles." The air between them was thick with tension. Cade knew this was his moment. If he was going to protect the cabin, and the secret it held, he had to act now. He wasn't sure what Vortex and his mercenaries were planning, but he was ready to fight for it. With a swift motion, Cade reached for his rifle, aiming it squarely at Vortex. The mercenary leader's expression changed from amusement to a cold, calculating stare. The showdown had begun, but Cade wasn't going down without a fight. The truth was out there, hidden in the woods, and he wasn't going to let anyone take it from him. The tension in the air was thick. Cade stood in the firelight, rifle in hand, watching Vortex with a mixture of fear and determination. The mercenary leader had not moved, his cold eyes locked onto Cade's. For a moment the world felt still, as if time itself had stopped. Cade could hear his heart pounding in his chest, the only sound breaking the silence of the woods. "You're making a mistake, Miller," Vortex said quietly, his voice calm but carrying an edge. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. The technology your uncle found, it's not something you can protect. It's too powerful for someone like you." Cade's grip tightened on his rifle, but he didn't respond. His mind raced. He had no idea what Vortex was talking about. What was this technology? What did it do? Cade had been led to believe that his uncle had hidden something important, but the more he learned, the less he understood. All he knew for certain was that Vortex and his men were after it, and they wouldn't stop until they got it. "I don't care what it is," Cade finally said, his voice steady. "If it means protecting this land, I'll fight for it. You won't take it from me. You don't get it, do you?" He stepped closer, the air between them crackling with tension. "This isn't just about land. This is bigger than you or me. The power that's hidden here, it could change everything. And you, standing in my way, will only make things harder for yourself." Cade didn't move, but he felt the weight of Vortex's words. Whatever was hidden in the cabin and the surrounding woods, it was clear that Vortex knew far more about it than Cade did. The mercenary leader had his own plan, and Cade was the obstacle standing in the way. "Listen," Vortex said, his tone shifting slightly. "I don't want to hurt you. You've got potential, Miller. But if you don't back down, I'll make sure you regret it." Cade's mind raced as he tried to think of his next move. He couldn't let Vortex get his hands on whatever was hidden in the cabin. He had to protect it, not just for himself, but for everyone in Red Ridge. But he also knew that he couldn't win a fight against Vortex and his mercenaries alone. Then, an idea struck Cade. One that felt risky, but might be his only chance. Without warning, he lowered his rifle and backed away slowly. "I'm not giving up, but I'm not going to fight you here," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I'll give you one chance to leave. If you don't, I'll make sure you regret it." Vortex's eyes flickered with surprise, but he didn't move. "You think you can outsmart me? I've seen men like you before. They always think they have a way out. But in the end, they're just obstacles." Cade didn't reply. Instead, he turned and sprinted toward the woods, his heart pounding. He had no plan, no backup, and no idea if he could pull this off. But he knew that running was his best option. If he could get to the cabin first, he might be able to find a way to protect whatever it was that Vortex wanted. As Cade ran, he heard the sound of footsteps behind him, followed by the crack of a branch. Vortex wasn't far behind. Cade pushed himself harder, his legs burning, but he didn't stop. The clearing was only a few minutes away. He had to get there first. The wind whipped through the trees as Cade made his way back to the clearing. He could see the faint outline of the tablet in the distance. The light from the fire was beginning to fade, but Cade knew where he was going. He reached the clearing just as Vortex emerged from the trees. Cade didn't hesitate. He dashed forward and grabbed the tablet, pulling it from the ground with all his strength. It wasn't easy. This was no small stone. But as he lifted it, he felt the hum from before, the energy coursing through his body. The tablet was alive, and it was responding to him. Cade's heart raced as he looked back at Vortex, who was now standing just outside the clearing, watching with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You think you can control it?" Vortex shouted. "You have no idea what you're doing." Cade ignored him, his focus entirely on the tablet. He didn't understand how it worked, but he could feel its power. It was unlike anything he had ever felt before. As the tablet hummed in his hands, the symbols on it began to glow again, brighter than ever. Cade's mind was flooded with visions, images of faraway places, alien worlds, and people who seemed both familiar and strange. The images flashed faster, almost too fast to process. Then something changed. The symbols on the tablet shifted, and for a moment, Cade felt a deep connection to whatever was on the other side of the device. He could feel the technology reaching out to him, communicating in a language he didn't understand. It was like a door opening in his mind, revealing a path he had never seen before. Vortex took a step forward. "You don't know what you're playing with," he warned, his voice laced with fear. "Put it down, Miller. It's not for you." But Cade didn't listen. He could feel the energy of the tablet coursing through him, and he knew, deep down, that this was his only chance to stop Vortex and his mercenaries. He had to do something. He had to act. Without thinking, Cade slammed the tablet into the ground. The energy from the device surged outward, filling the air with a brilliant light. Cade shielded his eyes as the force of the blast knocked him backward. The ground shook beneath him, and the world seemed to spin out of control. When the light faded, Cade slowly got to his feet. The clearing was silent. The tablet was gone, its power having vanished with the explosion. Vortex stood in the distance, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "You idiot," Vortex shouted, but Cade didn't care. The tablet had done something. It had stopped Vortex, at least for now. But what had it done to the world? What had it opened? Cade didn't know, but he had no choice but to find out. He turned and ran toward the cabin, his heart racing. The battle was far from over. Vortex and his mercenaries wouldn't give up so easily. But Cade had something now, a piece of the puzzle, a part of the truth, and he wasn't going to let it go. The rest of Red Ridge, the entire world, was about to change. Cade could feel it. Whatever his uncle had left behind, it was only the beginning.